Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Chasing Psychological Safety video series. This week, we're thinking really hard about how teams have experienced the proof of concept, the POC of the COVID crisis, what's happened in the last 12 months or more than 12 months now to teams, how they're going to pull out of that crisis, how we're going to move forward as teams, and what are the different factors that have impacted that? I think it's really important now at this stage in time to reflect on what the last 12 months has held for teams in order to be able to move forward successfully and be teams that can work in what is going to be a long-term hybrid environment for many and all remote for some, and for some teams, going back to face-to-face. To be clear, for the purposes of this particular video, we're going to focus on teams that have been together for a while and been together pre-COVID. Yes, there's a conversation to be had about instant teams and teaming in the context of those teams that have got to come together very quickly, medical teams, emergency teams, airline teams, whatever it might be. But today we're just going to focus on those teams that are established and have been together for some period of time and how what they've learned from the last 12 months and how they can pull out and go forward.
Exactly. And there are no clear-cut answers. We don't preach here that we know precisely what to tell you and whether or not teams have come out of the pandemic with more or less of the healthy team behaviors we'd like to see. I think that's obviously very much dependent on the situation that they went into the pandemic in. Meaning teams that were, and there are several factors we're going to talk to you about today. And I think maybe taking those factors apart would mean that you can then look at your situation and see in your team's case, how many of those applied. One of those factors was obviously how used was the team to the idea of working remotely. A lot of the teams that entered the pandemic had no real brush with it. At most, they had, a Thursday working from home if someone was sick. Despite the years of various people in the enterprise probably having advocated for the fact that it would be better, it would be a great idea. Look at all the Silicon Valley, the biggest part of companies hadn't had any kind of structure in place for remote work. Much less for remote work that was sustainable and not accidental. So for those people that were completely unused to it, it has been a big jump realistically, because yes, understanding the translation between the day-to-day tasks into a drop in a remote reality where video became your everyday mode of communication is a massive change. It was even quite a dramatic change for those who had had some experience of it, in particular those who had been, changed jobs somewhat. They had been in jobs that would allow some remote work, or they had traveled quite some. Even for them, this reality in which you are in front of one screen in one room, having multiple focused conversations with your team and your clients has been a huge change. And lastly, at the other end of the spectrum are the teams that were already remote. Even I will tell you, as teams that we were already remote, and even for us, it has been quite something. Obviously, not so much because we were trying to get used to remote, but because we were battling with the reality around us. So no one had it easy, but the degree to which you are remote to begin with has played a big role.
Absolutely. And what you experienced pre-COVID is also a really big part of it. So as a team, you might have had a really easy, sweet run of it. And, there had been no major challenges, no major crises that you had to go through. And therefore, something like COVID, which is the biggest crisis easily any of us have faced as teams, both from the external, what's happening around us and the impact to us internally is, it was going to make it really, really hard to cope with. However, on the flip side of that, if a team has had some crises that they've been through, if they've been through, a restructure or a really difficult period as a team, if they've had to dig deep and get through toxic behaviors, whatever it might be, if they've had to deal with some really difficult politics in their organization, whatever it might be, that resilience that the team have built through being through difficult times together already would have made COVID a little bit easier to deal with, would have meant that they were prepared in some ways for dealing with a crisis. I'm not necessarily saying they would have been prepared for COVID, but they would have had some resilience and had some experience of crisis to help them get through that period of time.
Yes. Another factor would be how the members of the team have personally experienced the crisis in itself, in the sense that obviously it's very different for people from different places on earth. It was very different from people from different industries. And I think maybe one of the big factors is how close have they been to the tragedy themselves? Have they lost a family member? Were they from areas where COVID was a reality on the streets and you could hear the sirens of the ambulance right outside your window, as we have in the bigger cities? Or were they maybe somewhere remote where it was more of a case of turning off the news? Or from some places that had it slightly easier. I'm supposing that people in Gibraltar or Israel have had this, or New Zealand have a slightly easier run of working from home than others that have been in the thick of it. So the outside situation, the personal situation, the way we have each of us experienced a crisis would have impacted the way that they have reacted to their own teams as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we should counter this whole conversation with is that perhaps there's an upside too for some of these teams. There's been burnout, right? And lots of people are feeling very fatigued at the moment. They've got all kinds of fatigue, Zoom fatigue, being at home fatigue, not having seen other people fatigue. But is there also an element that is counter to that, which is that because we've been in our homes for the last 12 months, because we've been, stripped back to our human selves by COVID, because we've been reminded of what's important. We've had so many more human moments and made so many more real human connections, even if it was via Zoom in the last 12 months. We've reconnected with what's important with us, both at work and personally. And we've had those conversations, that there's potential that is the salve to the burnout to some extent and just counters that for us.
Indeed. So however your reality played out, however strong you come out the other side, there's a really amazing path ahead. And I think we're all feeling a little bit of the enthusiasm. As for the question of whether or not we're going to have more or less psychological safety, let's just resolve to have more. And more importantly, let's resolve to actually measure what we have instead of just wonder in theory if we do or we don't. Because, many of these places would like more of the thing, but they hadn't really measured the thing to begin with. So what we would like to see, and what we advise that you do, is that you take a step back, you look at all the gains and the wins we have actually grabbed from the hands of this horrible tragedy as teams and as workplaces, and hold on to them dearly and start building this path ahead, which will be a lot better from here on. Thank you so much for listening to us. And
thank you. Bye.
Bye.